You're a neighbor checking on an elderly couple who missed their Kentucky Derby party. You walk through their unlocked door, calling their names. The house is spotless, everything in perfect order. Then you step into the garage and discover something that will haunt investigators for over a decade. The headless body of an 88-year-old man, surrounded by carefully placed towels to contain the blood. This is the story of Russell and Shirley Dermond, a case so brutal and mysterious that it has baffled the FBI, consumed a sheriff's career, and left an entire community living in fear. What happened in that gated community on Lake Oconee in May 2014 defies logic, challenges investigators, and continues to shock anyone who hears the details. The date was May 6, 2014. Russell Joseph Dermond, an 88-year-old World War II Navy veteran, lay decapitated in his own garage. His wife, 87-year-old Shirley, was nowhere to be found. But this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would unfold over the next 10 days. Russell and Shirley Dermond weren't just any elderly couple. They were pillars of their community, living in Great Waters Reynolds, an exclusive gated subdivision on Georgia's Lake Oconee. Russell had served his country in World War II, then built a successful business empire owning several Hardee's restaurants in Atlanta. After retiring in 1994, he and Shirley moved to this peaceful lakeside community. The couple had been married for 64 years when tragedy struck. They had 4 children, 9 grandchildren, and a life filled with simple retirement pleasures. Russell loved golf and reading. Shirley was passionate about crossword puzzles and gardening. They were the kind of neighbors everyone loved. May 1st, 2014, was the last day Russell Dermond was seen alive. He had been running errands in nearby Eatonton, Georgia. Later that day, both he and Shirley spoke with their son Brad over the phone. It was a normal conversation, nothing that would suggest the horror about to unfold. The Dermonds had been invited to a Kentucky Derby party on May 3rd by their neighbors. It was exactly the kind of social gathering they would typically attend. But when May 3rd arrived, Russell and Shirley never showed up. By May 6th, the worry had become unbearable. The same neighbors who had hosted the Derby party decided to check on the couple. They drove to the Dermond home, a beautiful estate situated on the banks of Lake Oconee. The neighbors knocked on the front door. No answer. Then they noticed the back door was unlocked. The neighbors entered the house and began calling out to Russell and Shirley. Room by room, they searched the immaculate home. Everything was in perfect order. Not a single item was out of place. The beds were made, the kitchen was clean, and there were no signs of struggle anywhere in the house. But then they reached the garage. What they discovered there would be seared into their memory forever. Behind the couple's cars was Russell's body, but it wasn't just that he was dead. He had been decapitated. His head was missing entirely. Towels had been carefully placed around the corpse to prevent blood from draining under the garage door. The neighbors immediately called 911. Within minutes, the peaceful Lake Oconee community was swarming with police officers and investigators. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office had never seen anything like this before. Neither had the FBI agents who would soon join the investigation. Sheriff Howard Sills arrived at the scene and immediately knew this was unlike any case he had ever worked. The crime scene was both brutal and puzzling. The decapitation was clearly intentional, but why? And where was Shirley? As investigators combed through the house, they found something equally disturbing. Despite the violence that had clearly occurred, there was no evidence of forced entry. The house showed no signs of struggle except in the garage. Nothing appeared to be stolen. The couple's valuables were still in place, and there was no indication that robbery had been the motive. The search for Shirley became immediate and intensive. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Divers searched the lake. Every inch of the gated community was examined. Helicopters flew overhead, searching the surrounding woods and waterways. For 10 agonizing days, there was no trace of Shirley Dermond. Then, on May 16, 2014, 2 fishermen made a grim discovery. They were fishing near a dam on Lake Oconee, about 5 miles from the Dermond home, when they spotted something in the water. It was Shirley Dermond's body, weighted down with concrete blocks and submerged in the lake. The autopsy results would later reveal that Shirley had died from deep wounds to the head, inflicted by a blunt object. She had been beaten to death. Then her body had been disposed of in the lake in a deliberate attempt to hide the evidence. The discovery of Shirley's body transformed what was already a shocking murder into something far more sinister. The methodical nature of the crime was becoming clear. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone had deliberately and carefully executed a plan to kill both Russell and Shirley Dermond. The evidence began to paint a terrifying picture. When investigators examined Russell's body more closely, they found strands of Shirley's hair interwoven with Russell's wounds. His hands showed signs of bruising, indicating he had fought his attackers. Russell Dermond, at 88 years old, had fought desperately to protect his wife of 64 years. Sheriff Howard Sills began to piece together a timeline of the murders. The attackers had come to the Dermond home with a specific purpose. They hadn't broken in, suggesting that Russell and Shirley had either known their attackers or had been caught completely off guard. Gunshot residue found on Russell's shirt led investigators to believe he had been shot in the head before being decapitated. The decapitation wasn't the cause of death, but rather an attempt to hide evidence. By removing Russell's head, the killers were trying to prevent investigators from recovering the bullet that had killed him. The FBI was called in to assist with the investigation. Every resident of the gated community was interviewed. Every gardener and handyman who had worked in the area was questioned. The couple's children submitted to polygraph tests and passed. Friends, neighbors, and business associates were all scrutinized. The lack of obvious motive made the case even more baffling. The Dermonds were well liked in their community. They had no known enemies, no significant debts, and no apparent reason why anyone would want to harm them. They lived quietly, enjoyed their retirement, and seemed to pose no threat to anyone. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to slow. Despite following hundreds of leads and interviewing countless people, investigators were no closer to identifying the killers. The case became a personal obsession for Sheriff Sills. Years passed with no arrests, no suspects, and no significant breakthroughs. The murder weapon was never found. Russell's head was never recovered. The killers seemed to have vanished without a trace. Then, in 2024, there was a breakthrough. Advances in DNA technology had opened new possibilities for cold case investigations. The FBI and Putnam County Sheriff's Office made a stunning announcement. They had found DNA evidence that didn't belong to either Russell or Shirley Dermond. This was the first time in the entire investigation that authorities had confirmed the existence of foreign DNA at the crime scene. The DNA evidence was found on Russell's shirt, the same shirt that had tested positive for gunshot residue. This DNA had been left behind by someone who had been in direct contact with Russell Dermond during the attack. The DNA evidence was sent to a private laboratory for advanced analysis. The hope was that modern techniques might be able to extract enough genetic material to create a complete profile that could be entered into criminal databases. Sheriff Sills was cautiously optimistic about these developments. For the first time in years, there was real hope that the case might finally be solved. The reward for information in the case was increased to $25,000. The investigation revealed that multiple people had been involved in the murders. The logistics of the crime, the transportation of Shirley's body to the lake, and the methodical way the scene had been staged all suggested that this wasn't the work of a single individual. One theory that gained traction was that the murders were connected to a botched extortion attempt. Sheriff Sills believed that the killers had come to the Dermond home demanding money or valuables, but when the elderly couple couldn't provide what was being demanded, the situation had escalated to murder. The methodical nature of the murders became even more apparent as investigators continued their analysis. The towels placed around Russell's body had been carefully positioned to contain the blood. The disposal of Shirley's body showed similar planning. The killers had weighted her body down with concrete blocks, clearly intending for it never to be found. This level of organization suggested that the perpetrators were familiar with the area. They knew the layout of the gated community, they knew about the lake, and they had access to materials needed to dispose of the body. The impact of the murders on the Lake Oconee community was profound and long-lasting. Residents who had once felt completely safe in their gated community now lived with constant fear that the killers might still be among them. Many installed additional security systems and became suspicious of strangers. The case has become a symbol of the challenges facing law enforcement in the modern era. Despite advances in technology and investigative techniques, some crimes remain unsolved. The Dermond murders represent one of those cases where traditional investigative methods have reached their limits. The DNA evidence discovered in 2024 represents the best hope for solving this case. The scientific analysis is ongoing, with experts working to extract enough genetic material for a complete profile. Even with advanced techniques, it can take months to develop usable results. The investigation continues to focus on the possibility that the murders were connected to other unsolved crimes in the region. The level of violence and the methodical nature of the killings suggest that this might not have been the perpetrator's first crime. The current status of the investigation reflects both hope and frustration. The DNA evidence represents the most promising development in years, but it's also a reminder of how little physical evidence was left behind by the killers. Sheriff Sills continues to work on the case daily, even as he approaches retirement. He's made it clear that he won't retire until the case is solved. The FBI continues to provide support and resources for the investigation. The case has also benefited from advances in investigative techniques that weren't available in 2014. Beyond DNA analysis, investigators now have access to improved database systems, better forensic techniques, and cell phone data analysis that could potentially track movements in the area during the time of the murders. The broader implications of the Dermond case extend beyond Lake Oconee. The murders represent a type of crime that challenges traditional law enforcement methods. The lack of obvious motive, the absence of physical evidence, and the methodical nature of the killings create a perfect storm of investigative challenges. The psychological toll on everyone involved in the investigation has been significant. Sheriff Sills has spoken openly about how the case has affected him personally. The impact on the Dermond family has been even more severe. Not only did they lose their beloved parents in the most horrific way imaginable, but they also have to live with the knowledge that the killers are still free. Brad Dermond, one of the couple's sons, has become a frequent spokesman for the family. He continues to make appeals for information and works closely with law enforcement to keep the case in the public eye. His dedication to finding justice for his parents is both admirable and heartbreaking. The case has highlighted the importance of community involvement in solving crimes. Someone in the Lake Oconee area might have seen something suspicious during the time of the murders. Someone might know about unusual behavior from an acquaintance. This information could be the key to finally solving the case. The recent developments in the case, particularly the DNA evidence, have generated renewed hope that justice might finally be served. However, DNA evidence is just one piece of the puzzle. Even if the DNA provides a match, investigators will still need to build a case that can be successfully prosecuted in court. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to murder cases, which means that the killers can still be prosecuted even if they're identified decades after the crime. This gives investigators unlimited time to work on the case, but it also means that evidence continues to degrade and witnesses' memories continue to fade. The case of Russell and Shirley Dermond represents more than just an unsolved murder. It's a story of love, loss, and the search for justice. Russell and Shirley were married for 64 years. They had built a life together, raised a family, and were enjoying their retirement in what they thought was a safe community. The investigation into their deaths has consumed thousands of hours of law enforcement time, involved multiple agencies, and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet the killers remain free, and the case remains unsolved. But the investigation continues. New evidence is being analyzed, new techniques are being employed, and the hope for justice remains alive. The DNA evidence discovered in 2024 represents the best chance yet for solving this case. The memory of Russell and Shirley Dermond deserves justice. Their family deserves closure. Their community deserves to know that the killers have been caught and will never be able to harm anyone else. If you have any information about the murders of Russell and Shirley Dermond, please contact the Putnam County Sheriff's Office. A reward of $25,000 is available for information leading to an arrest and conviction in this case. This has been the story of the Laker Coney murders, a case that has haunted investigators and a community for over a decade. The search for answers continues, and the hope for justice remains alive.